I did really good with not having a plan B and not having really anything to fall back onto. And, was just very focused on, well, if everything goes wrong, I'm not in any worse of a position than I am today.
If you were tired of not feeling fit, tired of just not having a focus, tired of just not having the financial resources that you deserve, this is your place to be. I'm Jason Yarusi. This is the Little Under Podcast. Excited today to have Gabriel Hamel on the show. Gabriel, how we doing?
Doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to be here. So Gabriel's invested in a ton, right? So multifamily properties, mixed use, commercial properties, mobile home parks, currently holds over 60 million in real estate portfolio consisting over 450 multifamily assets, mixed use, mobile homes, the whole deal. So, Gabriel, give me a little onset, so you take you back 10 years, right? What were you doing before you dove into this route?
Yeah, I'll go back farther than that. I mean, really, I was the kid in school that didn't understand why what the teacher was teaching had to do with the real world. It was hard to kind of connect the dots. Like, I don't think I would have stayed in high school if it wasn't for the social aspect or for being on the high school wrestling team. So I ended up joining the military my senior year of high school. I joined an infantry unit, Army National Guard, doing the 1 week in a month thing, prior to being a legal adult, prior to graduating high school. And just thought, hey, we go play in the woods, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, just kind of like the commercial. And then, I graduated high school, took some odd end jobs, went off to basic training, and a couple years after that. So I graduated high school in 2000. Around 2002, I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I'm like, oh, this makes sense. So not really a how-to book, but it talked about real estate investing. It talked about, financial literacy. It talked about all these things that they weren't teaching in school. And really, it was the first, piece of literature. First thing I ever read. It's actually the first book I ever read cover to cover, word for word in my entire life. So I got all the way through school without ever reading a book. And I'm like, this makes sense. I'm going to invest in real estate. Shortly after that, I ended up being deployed over to Iraq in 2003 and 2004, 14-month deployment. So I went from living in my friend's attic for $100 a month. I go on this deployment, but I have real estate on my mind. And so, I get deployed and I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back alive, not too messed up. And I'm going to buy some real estate. So that was kind of my initial journey, at least in my mind at the time, was like, I'm going to buy some real estate. I had no idea how to, but it was definitely, it was a strong desire. And that was kind of my first introduction to, hey, there's something else outside of just go to school, go to more school and get a normal job.
So at this point, like most that would be listening are going to feel stuck. They're going to feel overwhelmed, right? So they're going to get to this point, like, yeah, okay, that sounds awesome. I'm right there with you, right? I want to go out there. I want to buy real estate. I want to break the mold. It's on my mind too. But then they're stuck and they never actually go down the evolution of doing that, right? So how did you break through that piece of the puzzle to start putting that into play?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm big on mindset. I think everything starts in the mind, right? And so I was okay not knowing how. It was just a strong desire of being financially free and believing that real estate would be my path. I really didn't have any other type of education. I didn't have any degree to fall back on. I didn't have any kind of expertise in any other area. So to me, it just made sense. So part of it was just the commitment into the mind of like, I am going to do this, and people have done it before me, and I'm not making up something new. People have been investing in real estate for a lot of years, and people have been able to create financial freedom and create wealth from buying real estate. And so for me, it was a commitment in the mind first that yes, I want to do this. It's possible for me, and I'll figure out the how next. And so the how for me was, I come back from the deployment in 2004 and I start looking at properties, and this is during the subprime. And so, 2005, anyone can get a house, but there was a lot of competition too. And so I'm making offers. It was amazing that I was bank financeable because I had no job, no income, no down payment, but I was able to buy a home in 2005. It made good financial sense to rent out a couple of the bedrooms. It was before house hacking was really a term, but I rented out 2 of the rooms and I lived for less than I could anywhere else. And I essentially did that in 2005, 2006, 2007. And then in 2008, bank guidelines had changed dramatically. Some call that the Great Recession. And, in 2008, I went back to a bank and said, hey, I want to buy another house. And they said, you don't qualify. And I said, well, what do you mean I don't qualify? I've been, buying a home a year for the last 3 years. I've made my mortgage.
Got it. So you had brought a couple homes at that time. So like 2004, you brought the first one, then you're like, okay, cool, this works. And you brought a couple more?
Yeah, I bought a home in '05 and I'm like, this is easy. Like didn't need a co-signer. I had no job, no income, no down payment. I'm like, I can buy a house. This is wild. This is easier than the books. And so 2006, I had opened up a small nutrition store that never really made a ton of money, low overhead. So, I just a couple $100 a month was not enough to live off of. And so
why'd you do that? If I just out of curiosity, why'd you jump out of the real estate path? What drew you to that?
I was deployed with a guy who had been in the nutrition business, and we decided to open up, when we came back after about a year after being back, we're like, why don't we just open up our own store? So we opened up a little nutrition store inside of a gym. And that was really my first introduction to business. I had bought that one home. I actually rented one room out to my brother and one room out to my business partner. And we ran the store for a couple of years, but really during that time, I was either downstairs working out because it was in the gym, or I was on the computer looking at more real estate deals. And even though it was a competitive market, there was bank financing in '05, '06, '07. And so I, fast forward to like 2008, I had those 3 houses. I shut the store down because it just wasn't making really any significant money. And my first child was born in 2008. And that was really that first oh shit moment of like, all right, I have these couple houses. They cash flow, but only a couple $100 a month. Like what do I do? And that's when I went back to the bank in '08 and said, well, I'd like to buy another house. And they said, you do not qualify. Guidelines have changed. You actually need a job. You need income. You need a down payment, none of which I had. And so in 2008, I shut the store down. I started taking a bunch of odd and end jobs, like literally help wanted ads on Craigslist, landscaping. I was, making phone calls for this one company, doing some mystery shop and stuff, like anything I could do to make a few dollars, I would do. And then I ended up taking a 30-hour a week minimum wage job in a high school special education class. So about 3 months into that job, I started thinking about my goals of being financially free through real estate. And I'm like, this is not my dream. I don't want to be, working this low paying job the rest of my life. I need to get serious. And so, from 2008, when I had that job, I started looking for properties every night online. I would get on Craigslist after work and just talk to all these for sale by owners. I would literally call any seller that, had a property for sale. I was looking on the MLS. I was looking on Craigslist. But I had no money at the time and I wasn't bank financeable. And I remember reading about other ways to invest in real estate. And I had heard about private money, hard money, and seller financing. And so at the time, I knew nobody with money and I wasn't comfortable asking a hard money lender because I really didn't have that much of a background yet in real estate investing. So I decided seller financing would be my path. And so from '08 to '09, I made several hundred calls, had several hundred conversations. And in 2009, I put together a seller finance deal that replaced that minimum wage job. And I never went back to work after that year. So I was financially free, technically. I still, my income exceeded my expenses, but I wasn't living large by any means. It was that first level of financial freedom, finding the property that replaced my income.
Live 100 is about breaking habits that no longer serve you so you can build momentum to just get the future that you truly desire, right? And what you spoke about here is just some of the roadblocks that could have been huge roadblocks. And many times, for listeners, like we seek out the no, and then we're like, okay, I guess that's a no, right? So at this point, you have no money, you can't get bank financing, right? Nobody with money. That's 1, 2, 3 of why people would stop in real estate. And so what you came upon, I call it figure it out mode, right? You just keep figuring it out, right? At this point, you just keep figuring out what's going to be the next thing I need to do. Just keep pushing the ball forward, right? Because there's so many reasons why someone will stop. And we see this with all evolutions of our life. Just think of anything, right? Relationships, finances, faith. You could put a roadblock in any capacity there. But if you're saying, listen, I'm going to figure it out, you find a way to figure it out. And you're speaking to that right here, right? So you even get to the seller financing deal, right? Oh, I can't get financing, so I guess I don't know how to buy this. I don't know anybody with money. Oh, I can't figure out how to get money, right? Oh, I don't know how to do this with no money down, right? But you just keep pushing the ball forward. And so you get to this deal, you get to the seller financing deal, and talk us through the evolution, right? When you get to that point, was your mind like, okay, bullish, let's keep going? Or you're just like, I don't know what I just did, but let's kind of figure it out from there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it was, it was interesting because I didn't have money, and I actually feel fortunate looking back that I didn't have money because it forced me to get creative. And so with with these hundreds of conversations I had with sellers, I found that sellers were usually stuck on price, down payment, or interest rate, or some other emotional aspect of the deal. But it was usually one thing that was important to them. And so, oftentimes in those early years, I would have these conversations, and that's what it was about. It wasn't so much I was worried about, no's. It was just having these conversations, and these conversations would educate me. They would educate me on what sellers wanted. And for some sellers, it was the price that was important. Some, it was a down payment. But what I also did, I was able to analyze hundreds of deals during that time and have those hundreds of conversations. So when a deal came across my way, it was 2 duplexes. They sat side by side. So it was 4 units. And I'm running the numbers, which I had multiple other times on all these other properties that didn't pencil out. I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, this one makes sense. This one pencils. Then there was this like, oh, what am I missing? Because it was kind of newer to me, right? It was my first seller finance deal. But then I had to ask myself, like, well, what do I have to lose, right? My only criteria was the property had to be cash flow positive. I didn't know all these complex metrics other than, hey, if I can do a no money down deal, which just ended up being a no money down deal. In fact, every deal I did from 2009 through 13 was all no money down seller finance deals, with the only criteria being that they had to be cash flow positive. And I was okay with all the what ifs that could happen, right? I had a lot of people in my life saying, oh, well, what if prices do this? What if a tenant moves out? Or what if they damage it? What if, all these what ifs that could happen in real estate? And I'm thinking like, well, shit, what if it goes right? And what do I have to lose? I did really good with not having a plan B and not having really anything to fall back onto. And, was just very focused on, well, if everything goes wrong, I'm not in any worse of a position than I am today, right? And so then it's the question like, well, what if it all goes right?
I call that the 1%, right? Because in our minds, we always trend and tend to think of the 1% of what could go wrong in the worst way, right? And so that basically debilitates most everyone, right? So, oh, if I buy this house, the tenants will burn it down. I'll be on the hook, right? Someone will die, and then all of a sudden I'll be in jail. They'll come take my dog, right? That's like you're like, what just happened, right? But if you can give we'll say credence to that portion, you have to look at the 1% of what possibly could go right, because we can put our mind to think of the other side of it and say, okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that could happen. But what if it all goes right, like you just said, right? And we look at that typically as a limitation most times, but many times the limitations become our strengths, right? And so your factor, like I only had one thing, right? I had no money, had no bank financing, so here I go. But when you found that piece, what we lose the ability to do is just double down, right? You're like, I'm doubling down. Like 2009, 2013, I just go straight seller financing, no money down, right? Just straight out of pocket. And with real estate, that can be hard to do because there's just so many just glossy things, right? Because you're like, oh, I did this once, I might as well try something else, when you're just like, yeah, double down, right? And then you start building momentum in that way. Before you got to that piece of the momentum, right? What can be troubling for many is they get frustrated, right? Because they try it for a week or they try it for a month, and all of a sudden they just keep hitting roadblocks, they keep getting no's, or they just keep figuring out. What's been a key to keeping momentum, right? How do you keep the energy pushing before you start having the momentum?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's just trusting the process, right? I spent a year with phone calls and conversations, and, every other property didn't pencil for me, right? Either the seller wanted more money down than I had, or the seller wanted a price or terms that just would make the property cash flow negative. But because of that process, after about a year, I bought that first deal, and then it did snowball from that. So that momentum came naturally because I trusted the process. If I would have stopped at, say, month 11, I wouldn't have bought that first deal, and I probably wouldn't have bought the second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And I've had that same experience with other people. I have a close friend who, wanted to invest in real estate. I'm like, you got to call people, you got to tell people what you're doing, you got to put it out there in the universe. You got to tell everyone that you come across what you're looking for. And he was super excited, like very excited about real estate. And for about 6 months, and then 7 months, 8 months. And then right about that 9 months was like, man, I'm getting frustrated. I'm making offers. I'm having phone calls. And I'm like, trust the process. And right about that, not that a year is always the magic number, but right about that year mark, he did close on his first investment property. And a couple months later, his second, and a few months later, his third. And it's like, what if he would have stopped at month 10? And it was kind of the same story for myself. Like, it snowballed once I took that first deal down. The opportunity opened up to buy so many other pieces of real estate. But what if I would have stopped before I did that first deal? And that first deal, gave me both the confidence and experience to then go do the second and third and so on.
Yeah, it's hard to keep motivated, right? And what I talk to a lot is that if you're doing this for just right now, and you're like, I just want to get rich tomorrow, right? That's a hard narrative to have come true, right? But if you're doing this because, right, you have a young family, you have kids, right? You have all this part, you're trying to set up your future, then like, if you're doing the process, what's the rush, right? It's going to come. I can't promise you it's going to be month 6, month 9, month 12, who knows? But if you're doing the work, it's going to show up and it's setting you up for the future you. But we're always such in a rush for like the current me, right? But many times that gets me unmotivated, right? Because then I'm like, okay, oh, why hasn't it happened yet? And you see this all the time, especially in our world with multifamily real estate. It's not like a quick win when you're like wholesaling a deal and you can find a deal in less than a month and something can work in your favor. These deals take a long time to come to fruition. I mean, it could be months, right? You're 6, 8, 9, 18 months, right? But a big deal can really have a gigantic change for your future. And so if you're setting it up right, then you just have to be patient with the process, like you said there. And when you say that, and you've gone through this process, what are some of the things, like even going back to Nutrition Shop, like we learn all lessons from there. What's some of the hard truths that you've had, that you've realized, right, that have built you to be able to continue to grow and scale where you've been today?
Yeah, I think a big one on patience is a big one. You mentioned patience. I like to think of it as actively patient. I look back, 2020, I had it was like the first year since 2008 that I hadn't bought a property. And I'm telling myself the same thing that I told my friend, like, trust the process. Well, December 31st of 2020, so last day of 2020, I had 4 mobile home parks in contract. I ended up closing on 2 of those early 2021. And so it's like, I'm telling myself the same things, like, hey, this is actively patient. I'm putting in the work. I'm trusting the process. It may not be always on my timeline or exactly what I think it should be, but because I trust that process, all of a sudden, last day of the year, I'm in contract on 4 properties, and early the next year, I close on 2 out of 4 of those, right? And so I think of actively patient all the time, because often we want to force something and make it happen, when sometimes being patient, sometimes just taking a step back is maybe the best thing you can do.
Patience is such a hard thing, right? And you think about it, especially when you, like, even in your own world of your figure it out mode, or just in anybody, right? It's just hard to be patient with anything in our evolution. It's hard for us to stay focused. It's hard for us to stay committed. But when, it's funny, you phrase it like that. We say aggressively patient, aggressively persistent. Like it's that way to keep pushing forward with the understanding that you have to wait for the results to show up, right? You have to allow the seed to be nurtured. You have to allow the tree to grow. And when you can work on patience in your mind and just feel confident that the steps you're doing, because that's probably a good lead in here, trust the process, right? But when you're not sure the process is the right process, how do you stay committed to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it comes back to belief. Like, I think those early years, like, I didn't really think of it as necessarily a process. I was just so dead set on my mind that, hey, real estate will be my path. So anything I could do, there was a lot of activities that I did that were real estate related. Like, those early years, I'd go to like every open house sign. I'd call every single for sale sign I saw, because I didn't know what the process was. I just knew in my heart, in my mind, that real estate would be my path to financial success. And so I did everything real estate related until that became clearer and clearer, right? I realized the process later became building relationships and having conversations. That's what I was good at: building relationships, having conversations, and creative financing. In those early years, I didn't know what the process was, but I had to dip my toe in everything real estate to see what was going to come to fruition, what was going to actually, bear fruit and be a benefit. And what I found was, it was letting people know what I was looking to buy and building as many genuine relationships and having as many genuine conversations as I could.
The trial of doing is so important, because one, yeah, sure, you can identify what's right, but many times what's worked for me is that I identify what I'm not good at, right? Or identify that something I don't want to do, right? Because many times you can think it all through, right? I can think about how to go and buy this house, flip this house, and resell this house, but until I get in the action, I'm like, yeah, I was flipping this house. I don't want to work with a contractor. You can figure out anything right there. Well, eliminating off your plate is so great. And the risk with that can be minimal. And usually when you think about the process of anything, you think about, like we get back to again, like the 1% of what could go wrong. But you have to put your toe in there because you're not jumping off a 10-story building, right? You're just stepping off a curb. You're saying, okay, let me get out there, right? So you start making all these calls, you start getting in front of people, right? And you start using these strategies. What was something that was a strategy that you used to just effectively build relationships?
Yeah, a lot of it was listening, right? And especially with these seller finance deals, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so by having these conversations, I was really getting a free education because I got in the heads of sellers. And it really, in a lot of ways, it wasn't intentional. I just didn't know. I was curious. A lot of these sellers were, mom and pop investors who had been investing for 20, 30, even 40 years, who had built up usually a significant portfolio, a small portfolio. A lot of times they own these properties free and clear, but they were self-managing. They were burnt out. They were good people, but tired landlords. And a lot of times it was just asking the right questions. So one question I get asked a lot is like, how do I convince a seller to carry financing? Or how do I talk a seller into carrying financing? And my answer is I never have. And the other question I get a lot is like, what are typical terms? Well, there are no typical terms. And so it's really finding out, hey, what's important to the seller? And the way I did that is I would literally ask the most simplest question. I would first of all find sellers that already wanted to carry financing, because now I'm not having to educate sellers on what seller financing is. I would find sellers that were already advertising owner financing, owner carry, seller financing, seller terms. And I would just ask them, hey, what kind of terms would you be interested in? That simple line of, hey, what kind of terms would you be interested in? Sellers would talk. And usually their answer, their response to that question, it would be very obvious if it was price that was important, if it was interest rate that was important, if it was down payment, they would give me the answer. So then it was more so, can I give them the thing that's most important to them? Can I give them what they want and tweak everything else to still make the deal work for me? And so a lot of it really was, and here's a really good example. I share the example a lot. It was a commercial property and 7 multifamily properties. I still own it today. I bought it about a decade ago. It was listed as a development project, and it very well could be. The land is valuable. It's great zoning to develop at some point, but there's a great commercial property there and 7 multifamily properties with it, but it was marketed as a development project. And the seller, I later found out, rejected all these cash offers. I knew people that were making strong cash offers, and he wasn't responding to them. He was rejecting them. He wasn't even countering. And so after the listing expired, I went and walked with the seller and I said, hey, I'm just curious to why the property didn't sell. And he said, well, I really don't want to be cashed out. This is a 75-year-old retired judge, and he had no family. And that's what he said to me. He said, hey, I have no family to pass this on to. What I really want is an income stream. And if I were to pass away, there's this nonprofit organization that's really important to me. And if I were to pass away during this, these monthly payments, I would want those payments to go to the nonprofit. So here's a guy who was flexible on price, down payment, and interest rate. What was most important to him was that he had an income stream, and that if he were to pass away, that this nonprofit that was near and dear to his heart would continue to benefit from him owning this real estate. And so what I heard him say is, I have flexibility on price, down payment, interest rate, which he did, as long as this nonprofit's taken care of. And so we set up a seller finance deal where if he were to pass away during the term of the seller finance loan, instead of, once he passed away, that nonprofit would continue to get the payments. And it was not only did not a single other potential buyer know what his wants were or needs were, his own broker didn't even ask him, hey, what's important to you? And was actually soliciting all these cash offers, and he didn't want cash because he was like, well, what am I going to do with this cash? I would have to go reinvest it. I don't want to actively invest. I don't trust the stock market. I want income. And when I pass away, I want this organization to benefit. And so I heard, he told me very clearly what was important to him. And it was very easy to go, okay, well, can I give him that and make the deal work for me? And the answer was yes. And it's been a great property for me, and has been a great income stream for him.
One of my weakest points in the beginning was just trying to rationalize what the response would be by asking the question. And so many times we think through what the response is going to be, when in fact it's never that, right? And so we condition ourselves to ask a question thinking we know the answer already, when in fact everybody's different, right? Every single person you're going to engage with. And so many times we don't ask the question because we already think the answer, right? And it's going to be a no, or it's not going to work out for me, right? But just a simple part of asking the question, of being open to learn, like that's the evolution of everything here. And you can get so much great feedback in all parts, right? So, dealing with sellers, working with, selling to a new buyer, dealing with tenants, dealing with the marketing plan. Like so many times we just forget to ask the question. When you ask the question, everything opens up for you. And so you have to get past that level of fear of just breaking the habit just to assume the outcome. And assuming the outcome has never created the outcome that I destined for, right? It's either been greater or worse, right? Most capacity, right? If I go and ask a question, explore, and just go after the action, it comes out greater, right? But if you can get off the sideline and just start taking action and pushing yourself forward and just building momentum, and then just be open to the new experiences, right? That's a lot for what works in any facet of life, right? And so when you think of it on your side, and you think about some of your day, right? What are you doing today? Like, how's your day look today? Overall, the course, like, what do you do each day in terms of habits, rituals? Like, what works into your system today?
Yeah, I really designed my business to fit my lifestyle more than my lifestyle fit my business. So a big driving force for me is the ability to control my time and own my time. And it took me some time to realize that. I mean, I felt this very innate desire to be financially free, to have financial success. But it was more so a reflection in my own mind of like, why does this feel so important to me? Like, why do I want to be financially free? And why do I want to build wealth? And a lot of it for me with reflection came to, I wanted to own my time. Time freedom was important to me. It wasn't about swimming in a pile of money. It wasn't about necessarily having, all these tangible things. It was about, I want my day. I want to be able to do with my day whatever I want to do with my day. I want to be able to travel as I please. I want to be able to spend time with my family. I want to be able to really do anything that I want to do when I want to do it. I don't want to have a boss. I don't want to show up at a certain time and leave at a certain time. I don't want to have, someone else telling me like when a project's due or anything else. And so I realized that early on that time freedom was an important piece to me. And I've really designed my business around being able to own my time. So from day to day, my day can look very different, but it's important to me to be here in the morning when my kids are getting up for school, and I'm home in the day when they're off school. I usually work out in the middle of the day. Most days I'm taking a sauna in the morning and a cold shower, but it's less so about like, I do think habits are important. Like health is a very big, important part of my life, but it's more so like I get to control how I spend my day. Now, sometimes there's things out of my control. But that's the important thing. Like time freedom for me may look different than time freedom to somebody else, but it's about getting to have the freedom to do what you want with your time.
I find if you learn how to control what you can control, then you'll have time to deal with what you can't control in a good fashion, and it makes your day just fit all together.
Well said.
Yeah. Gabriel, I mean, this has been tremendous, man. So, if we were to leave the listeners with just 3 points, if you were to say, stop everything right now and just with your life, if you're just not happy with the path you're on, if you're not happy with the route you're on, if you were to make 3 assertions about what could help them transform just in a minor or major way, just by doing 3 simple things, what comes to mind?
I'd say first, get really, really clear on the couple things that are important to you. Like really clear. Like I'm really clear. There's a handful of things that are important to me. It's my family, it's my health, it's my freedom, and it's being able to travel and do what I want when I want with who I want. Right. And so if it doesn't align, and I guess my advice would be like, get clear on what's important to you. And then number 2, if there's things in your life that don't align with those couple things that are very important to you, take those things off your plate. I watch a lot of people, they say yes to all these things that don't align with what they actually want in life. And then they end up with a life full of all these things that they don't actually want. So get clear on what's important to you. Take things off your plate that don't align with those couple things. And then lastly, put things into your life that do align with those couple things. Like if your family is important to you, then actually create time to spend with your family. If travel is important to you, put those on the calendar, right? And I think I think it's almost more of a challenge in some ways for people that are in business or in real estate. I watch a lot of people in the real estate investing world. They take on all these real estate related activities, or they add all these real estate related type tasks to their day, to their week, to their month, to their life ultimately. And it's actually got them farther away from the thing they wanted in the first place. So people all the time will say, I want financial freedom. And I say, well, why? They say, and almost always, like 95% of the time, it comes down to time freedom. I want to spend more time with my family. I want to travel. I want to give back to this cause. But then they're taking on all these things that are getting them farther away from that time freedom. So I've watched so many people, they say, I want more time to spend with my family. They quit their W-2 job. They get into real estate. Now they're working 2-3 times more than they were before they quit their W-2 job. And they're actually farther away from that time freedom goal, which is why they wanted to get into real estate in the first place. So it's getting clear, taking shit off your plate that doesn't align, and making sure the things that are in your life do align with those things that you want.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it just gets back that success and happiness do not have to be overly complicated, but we just make it so complicated that it just never gets accomplished, right? And so when you think about what you just said there, be specific with why and what you want. Put on your plate what should trend to that and take off what shouldn't, right? And as simple as that, it allows you the outcome you're destined to have. So
I like to keep it simple. I don't like to overcomplicate things.
You know what? There's nothing better than that, right? Because we make everything so we want to make it complicated. Our own mind wants to make it complicated. We want to make everything complicated, and especially like the world of real estate. We want to make it so complicated that you just never actually take any action, right? And it's all parts of our life that we just think it has to be complicated, right? But you break it down, you have massive success just putting in a process. But lack of complication doesn't mean it's not complicated in nature. It gives you the results you want, and it gets you back to time freedom, right? We could all be busier. We could all be busier, but we trend for there. But Gabriel, this has been awesome, man. So people want to listen, they want to hear more, they want to learn more, they want to see more. Where are they going to find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me, I'm on Instagram at The Real Gabriel Hamel. Then I'm active. We have a podcast, the 0 to 100 podcast. And that's probably in 0to100tribe.com. That's the easiest ways to connect with me.
Gabriel, this is awesome, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Everyone listen, Live 100 podcast. Go check out everything Gabriel has going on. Let's do this.